Though Walter Piston is best remembered today as the composition teacher of notable Harvard students like Elliott Carter, Leonard Bernstein, and many others, he actively studied, experimented with, and wrote about serial music for decades. My video will focus on the first 28 measures of Piston's first serial work, Chromatic Study on the Name of BACH for organ, written in 1940. This piece integrates serial techniques with Piston's characteristic lean formal construction and refined counterpoint. Let's start by listening to the first 20 measures of the piece. Now let's look at the row and an initial sketch from the Walter Piston collection at the Boston Public Library. Piston organizes the row into trichords, an 013, two 014s, and an 012, and numbers the pitch classes from 1 to 12. The row opens with the BACH tetrachord, B flat, A, C, B natural, followed by its transposition up a perfect fourth, E flat, D, F, and E, and concludes with the remaining pitch classes. Piston writes in D, transposed to G next to the P form of the row, perhaps suggesting a tonal connection. This is reinforced by a structural focal point on G later in the piece. The transformations of the initial P row are listed with abbreviated labels. It's also worth noting that Piston retains enharmonic thinking. The first and final notes of the P and R row forms differ enharmonically. For example, the end of P10 is G sharp, while the beginning of R10 is A flat. This suggests he may have been thinking in terms of directional motion, sharps ascending and flats descending. At the bottom of the sketch, Piston systematically presents three rhythmic realizations of the opening phrase. These sketches differ from the published score both rhythmically and metrically. Although they are in 3/2 meter with syncopated and tied notes, Piston ultimately simplifies the passage using a consistent rhythmic pattern of a quarter rest followed by 3/4 notes. One result of this change is that the BACH tetrachord becomes less clear, but the contrapuntal structure strengthens, making the passage more reminiscent of Bach in texture than in pitch content. Let's turn to my annotated analysis. The score highlights the row forms and selected contrapuntal techniques. Notice that Piston favors rows based on pitch class 10 or those that could sum to 10. For example, in measure 17, there's an RI3 and a P7. His imitative contrapuntal approach makes these structures audibly distinct through variation and motivic cohesion using the BACH motto. A particular striking moment occurs in measure 17, where the music converges on G, a point you'll recall Piston references in a sketch. This moment suggests a tonal illusion and sectional division as the row treatment starts to shift after this point. And given the piece's dedication to BACH and its organ medium, it only seems fitting that the texture is highly imitative and features contrapuntal techniques such as canon and augmentation. Now let's listen to measures 21 to 28. In this passage, Piston gradually loosens the strict contrapuntal and row procedures. Looking at measures 21 to 24, there is a modified statement of R7 with augmentation, echoing measures 17 to 20. Notice that he presents the F-sharp G dyad in retrograde before completing R7, introducing an element outside of strict serial techniques. In this region, Piston blends free chromaticism with strict serial organization. Now let's focus on measures 25 to 28. Here, Piston simultaneously employs three different approaches to pitch organization. In the manuals, he interweaves fragments of R7 with non-row pitch classes to enhance motivic and contrapuntal connections. Meanwhile, in the pedals, he states the second hexachord of P3 measures 25 to 26, then presents it in retrograde with rhythmic alterations and omitting pitch class 9 and repeating pitch class 0. The piece continues in a similar fashion, incorporating harmonizations of the BACH motif, a mini variations set, and a synthesis of serial and freely chromatic passages, ultimately cadencing on a C-G dyad at the end of the piece. At the time Piston composed the Chromatic Study, he remarked to Ernst Toch, "When you first look at that music, it looks very strange, but when you get into it, it's not that strange anymore." Serialism for Piston was not a rigid constraint, but a liberating tool, offering what he called virtually endless freedom. His engagement with serial techniques lasted throughout his career, culminating in works such as Symphony No. 8, Piano Trio No. 2, and Ricercara for orchestra. For Piston, serialism was a fruitful vehicle for exploration, composition, and pedagogy.